Here's another headline from NPR. How racism became a marketing tool for country music. I kid you not. American taxpayers are spending $500 million a year to pay a local station to buy content that says country music is racist. Here's another headline from NPR. Donald Trump's long embrace of Vladimir Putin. Remember the Russiagate? The Steele dossier? NPR was right in there promoting it. If you're a news outlet and you want to publish this kind of stuff, that is your right as an American. We have freedom of the press. We have the First Amendment. You're not free in our country if you can't say what you think. You're not free in our country if you can't express yourself. I'm all for this, if that's what these outlets want to do. But I'm not for taking $500 million every single year and giving it to these stations to the exclusion of everybody else so they can do it. That's immoral. That's illegal as far as I'm concerned. Now, let me say a word about public broadcasting. There was a time, Mr. President, I don't know if you remember it, but I do, when families in the evening would gather around a single radio. They just had one radio in the house, or a single TV, often a black and white TV, to hear the evening news. And for many Americans, particularly in rural areas, public broadcasting was the only option for them. That was true in some parts of our country. They could only access public broadcasting to get up-to-date news and information. Those days are gone. Things are much different today. Today, Americans get their news everywhere. Everywhere. Websites, podcasts, social media posts, radio shows, cable TV, streaming, broadcast television. The world has changed, particularly the world of mass communications. I think back 10, 15 years ago in my state, Louisiana, newspapers were king, followed closely by local television stations. Newspapers led with the news and everybody else followed in terms of what was newsworthy. Boy, those days changed. I polled recently in Louisiana to find out where my people in Louisiana get their news. 4% of the people in Louisiana get their news from the newspapers. That's just a fact. Number one, as you might imagine, is the internet. The world has changed. This trend is not partisan. It's not a Republican thing or it's not a Democratic thing. President Trump and former Vice President Harris, they both did popular podcasts in their election. And many of my fellow senators and many of my friends in the House running for election also did podcasts as well. A lot of the pundits have even called the 2024 race the podcast election. No American today, not one that I know of, is dependent on a single source of news to remain informed. And that's a good thing. It might have made sense many, many, many years ago for the federal government to subsidize and fund public broadcasting. 50 years ago, that might have made sense. But the ability of the American people today to access whatever news they would like to hear from whatever form of media they choose, it's no longer limited. It's virtually unlimited just only by the imagination. So here's my question, Mr. President, and something that we need to think about. If all this is true, if media has changed, and it's accessible to everyone, why is the United States Congress, Why is the United States Congress still spending $500 million a year, not $500,000 a year, $500 million a year to fund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting? It makes no sense. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, we call it CPB, Mr. President, as you know. It's a nonprofit entity that takes taxpayer money that it gets from Congress and distributes it to local TV and radio stations. Now, you might not have heard of CPB, but you probably heard of two of its, I won't call them subsidiaries, but two of its closely affiliated entities, I'll call them. The Public Broadcasting Station, we call it PBS, and National Public Radio, NPR. Now, here's how it works. Every year, Congress gives the Corporation for Public Broadcasting $500 million. And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting takes that money and gives it to a lot of the local TV and radio stations. And a lot of those local TV and radio stations are encouraged to, and indeed do, buy programming if they're radio stations from NPR, or if they're television stations, they buy a pre-recorded, pre-developed programming from the PBS. Congress established this system and established the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in 1967. Over 50 years ago. At the time, Congress tasked CPB, and I'm not saying it didn't make sense then, it probably did make sense then, but Congress tasked the CPB with a mission to ensure that the American people had, and I want to quote here, to be precise, had, quote, universal access to non-commercial, high-quality content and telecommunication services. And indeed, CPB boasts that on its website that 99% of Americans have access to public media. Hell, they ought to. We're spending $500 million of your taxpayer money to make sure they do. That's not the question. Because Americans have access to all different types of and forms of media today. They don't need to get their news from public broadcasting. This isn't the old days when people had one television set or one radio and lived in a rural area and that was the only source of news. The world has changed. The issue today is whether the American people need taxpayer-funded public broadcasting to access high-quality content anymore. And they don't. And we all know they don't. You don't have to be Walter Cronkite's cousin to figure that out. Everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's on the internet. Everybody's heard of podcasts. Everybody's heard of cable. Many people have streaming services. Today, 97% of Americans have access to the internet. Why do we need public broadcasting? That's more than double the number of Americans who could access the internet two decades ago. Things have quickly changed. People now have a bottomless supply of news sources right at their fingertips whenever they need them. Why do we have to give $500 million a year to subsidize a certain small favored section of the media? Parents can also very easily find free educational programming if they want to. They don't have to go to public broadcasting. All they got to do is go to YouTube. All they got to do is go to other streaming services. The popular YouTube series Crash Course, for example, it has more than 16 million subscribers. PragerU is another educational content provider. It has 3.3 million subscribers. For comparison, PBS only has 1.4 million subscribers. You know what the difference is? You give them $500 million of your hard-earned money. That's the difference. Now, some may argue, well, we still need public broadcasting because it offers non-commercial programming. They argue it's really cool because you don't get interrupted by commercials. Well, the new chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Mr. Brendan Carr, has just called that into question. He's called into question whether NPR and PBS are really non-commercial broadcasts. Mr. Carr has noted that NPR and PBS regularly run commercial advertisements during their shows and broadcasts in contravention of federal law. No advertising? All you got to do is turn on the stations. Give me a break. And in fact, the FCC has launched an investigation into NPR and PBS to determine whether they've been violating federal law. There seems to be no distinction between the advertiser-funded content on PBS or NPR and the content Americans can access for free anywhere else. But there is a key difference. I'm going to keep coming back to it. PBS and NPR receive a truckload, a bucket load of cash from the American people. In total, Congress will send the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and indirectly NPR and PBS, $535 million in 2025. That's an increase of 20.2% since 2020. Has your income gone up 20.2% since 2020? I know your expenses have. By 2027, CPB wants Congress to send it nearly $600 million. For what? For what? PBS alone received roughly $130 million last year in taxpayer-funded grants from the federal government through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's 35% of its total budget. NPR similarly receives $96 million through taxpayer-funded grants from CPB. That's also roughly 32% of NPR's total budget. Why? Why? Why CPB? Why NPR? Why any of these alphabet soup entities? Why not the New York Times? Why not the Washington Post? Why not Fox News? Why these three particular entities? That's a question we have to ask. And we're not talking chump change here. We're giving them $500 million a year. NPR is one of the few, as far as I know, they're the only newsroom in the country that gets taxpayer funding. And you would think that after receiving nearly $100 million from NPR, I want to single out NPR for a second, you would think that after receiving nearly $100 million from taxpayers, that would motivate NPR to play it right down the middle, to only publish fair reporting. You would think that with the American taxpayer giving NPR $100 million every year, like clockwork, you should be able to go to NPR and look at the news and say, I don't know what party these folks are in. I don't know whether they're liberals. I don't know whether they're conservatives. I don't know whether they're left of center or right of center. I just know that they fairly report the news. But that's not the case, Mr. President. That's not the case. I want to give you a few examples of stories that NPR has published using taxpayer money. I'll just read the headlines. First headline, NPR News Service. Michael Avenatti, quote, a profile of the media-savvy attorney. They love Michael Avenatti. You know where Michael Avenatti is today? He's in jail. You know why? He's a crook. But for a while, he was a media darling on NPR. Here's another headline from NPR. How racism became a marketing tool for country music. I kid you not. The American taxpayers are spending $500 million a year to pay a local station to buy content that says country music is racist. Here's another headline from NPR. Donald Trump's long embrace of Vladimir Putin. Remember the Russiagate? The Steele dossier? NPR was right in there promoting it. A couple more headlines that NPR is putting out there using your tax dollars. This headline, monuments and teams have changed names. Let me say it again. Monuments and teams, presumably sports teams, have changed names as America reckons with racism. Birds are next. I don't know any birds that are racist. Here's another headline. Eating less beef is a climate solution. Eating less beef is a climate solution. I don't have anything against vegetarians. I'm a semi-vegetarian myself. I eat beef and cows eat grass. So that makes me a semi-vegetarian. But that's my choice. Not on NPR. Eating less beef is a climate solution. Here's why that's hard for some American men. Here's a final headline. I could go on the rest of the evening. How the Taliban adds to Afghanistan's woes when it comes to climate-fueled disasters. Boy, I can tell you that's on the mind of every person in Afghanistan today, is climate change. And the Taliban, I can guarantee you. I don't have a problem with these headlines. This is America. If you want to publish articles like this, which no person with a brain above a single-cell organism would call fair and balanced, if you're a news outlet and you want to publish this kind of stuff, that is your right as an American. We have freedom of the press. We have the First Amendment. You're not free in our country if you can't say what you think. You're not free in our country if you can't express yourself. I'm all for this, if that's what these outlets want to do. But I'm not for taking $500 million every single year and giving it to these stations to the exclusion of everybody else so they can do it. That's immoral. That's illegal as far as I'm concerned, or should be. Now, I'm sure that there's an audience in some campus coffee shop that wants to learn about racist birds, or the different ways in which cheeseburgers and the Taliban are contributing to climate change. But most American taxpayers would probably prefer that Congress spend their money on something other than these controversial points of view that appeal to only a small segment of America's population, while the rest of us foot the bill. Now, that's not just my opinion. A former editor at NPR, a gentleman by the name of Yuri Berliner. Mr. Berliner, he used to be an editor at NPR. He published a column last year. And in the column, he outlined the extreme bias at NPR. He detailed how NPR decided to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story. They wouldn't run stories about it. They said it wasn't real. Mr. Berliner, the former editor at NPR, said that NPR told its readers, and I'm quoting, quote, "We don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. And we don't want to waste the listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions." End quote. The Hunter Biden laptop is real. The FBI has it. It's there at the FBI headquarters, bigger than Dallas. Of course, we now know that the laptop was not just a distraction. Every bit of it was real. But NPR censored it using American taxpayer money. NPR also similarly covered the COVID-19 lab leak theory as though it was a conspiracy. That's how the news coverage reads, in my opinion. That if you believe that COVID-19 originated from a lab leak, you're a conspiracy theorist. I would point out that we're going to have to get some new conspiracy theories in America because all the old ones turned out to be true. The conspiracy theorists are up something like 37-0. But not if you read NPR. They say or said that the COVID-19 lab leak theory, you had to be some kind of conehead, some kind of meathead, some kind of whack job to believe in that stuff. Now the federal government, the CIA, the FBI, they've stated publicly that the pandemic likely originated from what? A lab leak. I can't make this stuff up. Now, other independent analysts have shown that NPR's content also leans left. Since 1970, the United States Congress has given NPR more than $14.5 billion. With all those taxpayer dollars, NPR bought a $201 million office space just up the road from the Capitol. It's swell office space, $200 million worth. NPR pays its hosts as much as $532,000 a year. It pays its chief diversity officer $320,000 a year. Pretty good work if you can get it. Not NPR money. Came from you. You paid those salaries. And despite all the spending, NPR's audience continues to decline because they're obsolete. Now, Congress does not send taxpayer money to the most popular podcast hosts in America. We don't. The anchors on Fox News, the anchors on CNN, the anchors on MSNBC, nor their stations, they don't get any taxpayer dollars. Nor do any of the journalists that ask me questions every day in the hallway of this building, unless they work for NPR or PBS or their affiliates of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Congress should not be picking winners and losers in the news media. But that's what we're doing. The United States of America has $36 trillion in debt. We can't afford anymore to blow $500 million for public broadcasting when Americans can find the same content, and in many cases better content, online for free. Now, if you want to support NPR and PBS or any other public media outlet, that is great. God bless you. This is America. You're free to do it. You are free to donate to those nonprofits as you see fit. Donate to them. But Congress should not compel taxpayers to fund them, to fund a service that the American people don't need, especially when the content, well, you can read what the content is, and maybe you agree with it. But a whole bunch of Americans don't. A whole bunch of Americans don't think that birds are racist. President Trump's Department of Government Efficiency is looking for fat to trim, Mr. President. As far as I'm concerned, this gravy train with biscuit wheels called the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is the perfect example of a project the American people no longer need and should not fund. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum unless Senator Peters would like me to yield the floor. I take that back, Mr. President. I've been given instructions to read this. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, oh, I love this. This is great. I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, this makes me so happy, the confirmation vote with respect to the Gabbard nomination occur at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, February 12th. Further, I ask that the cloture motions filed on Thursday, February 6th, ripen following disposition of the Gabbard nomination. And finally, if cloture is invoked on the Kennedy nomination, that's Mr. Robert Kennedy, the post-cloture time count, the post-cloture time count as if invoked at 1 o'clock a.m., Wednesday, February 12th. Thank you, Jesus.
Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered.